The Regent's Reign, Chapter 17, How Things Work. Almost 2 months after returning to Camelot, Boris was still not used to all the changes that had taken place. One of the biggest was Arthur had knighted a group of men from common families. He could see why. They were excellent fighters, the lot of them. Elian was swift, stealthy, and much stronger than he looked from years working a forge. Percival outstripped any other man in strength, but he was more gentle than Boris would have expected from a man of his size. Gawain was nigh unbeatable with a sword in his hand, and could outdrink any man. Lancelot was the most honorable of men, and only a step behind Gawain in swordcraft. The four of them, and Sir Leon, were something of a local legend these days, the Knights of the Round Table, named for the place in the Valley of the Fallen Kings where they'd been knighted. They had taken on an immortal army and won alongside Prince Arthur and Merlin. He'd been somewhat incorrect when he'd thought of her as Arthur's maid. "We need your approval on the menu for the Feast of Samhain, ma'am." The voice of the new steward echoed down the hall. "That's 3 months away, George, and we've talked about this. Stop calling me ma'am." Merlin's response was laced with laughter. "Yes, ma'am. Mary is insistent that all preparations and acquisitions must be ready sooner rather than later." "I can see why. How many nobles do we have coming to this? Last I checked, this was not a tournament." Merlin's voice sounded a little annoyed now. Boris peeked around the corner. He didn't often come down this way, but he was looking for Merlin at the behest of the Prince Regent. She sighed. "Has Arthur looked this over?" she asked. "Not yet. I believe the Prince Regent wishes us to delegate the planning of this particular feast," George said stiffly. Merlin raised an eyebrow. "Exact words?" "I don't have time, and the last one I planned was a bloody disaster. Have Merlin look into it," George said, eyes fixed on the tapestry across the hall. Merlin snorted out a laugh. "That sounds like him. Though, to be fair, the Yule feast was ill-timed this year for reasons none of us could control." She pointed out, "See if Mary's up to adding those little lemon cakes Arthur likes. She can cut the candied oranges to make space for it if need be." "Has Gwen gone over this yet?" Merlin asked, running a finger down the list. "She is busy, ma'am," George said, his face falling slightly. Merlin frowned and nodded. "I heard. Last thing he needs right now is a chill. Gaius says it's not serious." "Well then, it looks good, but see about having a few extra barrels of ale purchased from the Rising Sun. Gods know the knights drink enough for 3 people. She said, taking the quill he offered and scrawling a signature at the bottom of the page. "Sir Gawain has recommended a few barrels of the raspberry mead as well, as it is apparently particularly excellent in his opinion," George said, making a mark on one of the papers he was carrying. "A good opinion. Get 2 and make sure he doesn't drink all of it, if you can," Merlin said. Sir Boris rounded the corner and cleared his throat, catching their attention before bowing to Merlin, who blinked. "My lady, Prince Arthur is looking for you. I believe he said something about knighting and not being able to find the shirt he was looking for," Sir Boris said, doing a masterful job of keeping a straight face when Merlin swore and took off down the hall at a run, dodging 2 laundresses, neither of whom looked surprised. In fact, they expertly dodged around her without dropping so much as a sock. "Sir Boris," George said, bowing to the knight before making to leave. "Hold a moment," he called, and the steward stopped, turning back to Boris with a raised eyebrow. "Does she know, sir, that she's doing all the duties a queen would?" "Sir, you have not been back in Camelot long. You may not yet be aware of it. Camelot has a queen, in all but name, the same way Prince Arthur is king in all but name," George said stiffly, bowing his head to the knight. Boris nodded, looking after the future Queen of Camelot with a wry smile. Lancelot rolled his eyes at Gawain, who'd once again dragged him down to the tavern. Though the knight did not drink nearly as much as he used to, in his own words, he could still be found at least once a week at the Rising Sun, the tavern in the lower town. Just because you're married does not mean you cannot have a drink with friends. Hell, bring Gwen. Gods know she's more fun than you are, he joked. Gwen is busy tending to the king, Lancelot reminded Gawain. Uther had come down with a bit of a chill, which was being closely monitored as his health was already declining since Morgana's short-lived reign. Then let's drink to Arthur's health, Gawain joked. You know that's not who I meant, Lancelot said, and Gawain shrugged. The only true noble I've met so far who might deserve the title, Gawain said, shoving a tankard at Lancelot, who took it, nodding slightly. Sir Lancelot, a voice called, and he turned, blinking. Haldor, what are you doing here? He asked as the man grinned at him. Gawain raised an eyebrow. The man wore the garb of a sellsword, complete with the sword strapped to his back and the mace at his side. Just passing through. I hear you've done well for yourself, you and Sir Percival. Something about an immortal army? Haldor said with a chuckle. Every word is true. Buy us a drink and we'll tell you the whole story, Gawain said. I may well take you up on that, friend. But not tonight. He rummaged in his bag and pulled out a note. I've not seen our mutual friend, but it's very important that this letter gets to her, Haldor said, and Lancelot's eyes grew wide at the cramped handwriting, spelling out Merlin on the front of the envelope. Tossing down a few coins, he took the note and nodded to Haldor. I'll get this to her at once, he said, waving at the barkeep. Gawain frowned, knocked back his drink, tossed another few coins down, winked at the barmaid, and took off after Lancelot, who was not quite sprinting up to the castle. What is the rush, Prancelot? Someone's going to notice that you're up to something if you keep that up, Gawain pointed out lowly. He'd been a bit miffed to discover that Lancelot, Leon, and Percival all knew Merlin's secret as well. But it was nice to know the others would have her back. This is wildly important, Gawain, Lancelot said, pushing open the door to the physician's quarters. Gaius looked up and raised an eyebrow. Is Merlin here? In her room, going over one of Arthur's speeches, Gaius said. Lancelot nodded, striding across the room in 3 steps and knocking on the door. Come in, Merlin called. Lancelot opened the door and stepped in, holding out the letter. Gawain leaned in the doorway, raising an eyebrow as Merlin's eyes lit up at the handwriting on the envelope. She tore into it and gasped as she unfolded the letter, and 2 small objects fell into her lap. She seized them and let out a shaking breath. He found one. He did, Lancelot said, sitting next to her to read the letter as well. Merlin's smile was near blinding as she picked up the 2 items in her lap. One was what looked like a piece of discolored eggshell. It was minty green, and Gawain raised an eyebrow as he stepped into the room, sitting on one of the boxes there. Anyone gonna fill me in on this? He asked. Merlin shoved the letter at him before running down to Gaius to share the news. Gawain skimmed the letter. It was short, in the same handwriting as the one on the envelope. Her name is Ilios. It means son, was all it read. Gawain frowned in confusion. Still confused, he said as Merlin bounced back into the room. She closed the door behind her and dove under her bed, tucking the piece of eggshell into the hidden space there. When she emerged, she double-checked the door was closed. My father is the last dragon lord left alive after the purge. He's spent the last 2 years searching out dragon eggs in the old caves they used to live in. He's found one and hatched it. She held out her hand and Gawain blinked at the scale resting in Merlin's palm. It was bright blue like the midday sky on a cloudless day.